Welcome to Fredericksburg Mission, a podcast talking all things mental health and wellness in the Burgh, brought to you by...
How do you shorten the time it takes to buy a car? Car buying just got easier. Pohanka365.com lets you complete as much or as little of the car buying process online. Pohanka365.com. Car buying simplified. Anytime, anywhere.
Welcome to Fredericksburg Mission. My name is Angela Rivers, and today I am here with CEO of Capitalized Marketing, Gordon Duncan. Thank you, Gordon, for joining us today.
Yeah, I'm glad we could be here. I know we've been trying to make this work, so
yes,
I'm glad to be
sure.
here.
Yeah, of course. I'm excited for us to chat. We both have been through some serious medical circumstances, and they have made us who we are today. And so I love that we came together to collaborate, to share our story with the community.
Well, I appreciate it. The opportunity to share what I've been through, the highs and the lows. And again, I appreciate your intimacy in sharing those things as well. But the breaking down sort of the barrier of sharing those things with people and sort of the worry that people have of telling their story, hopefully in sharing it will encourage someone.
Exactly. When I, moved here, I was so scared to tell people that I had a past. Mm-hmm. I felt like I was going to get judged by it. But then one day somebody said, you need to share your story. It'll inspire other people. Other people are going through the same thing. And since then, I feel it's important to tell people what we've been through. Yeah,
in the midst of it, your brain sometimes doesn't even have enough, even of that thought, right? I mean, right. In the midst of brain injury or struggles like that, you're just doing your best to get through the day or trying to figure out maybe why your brain doesn't work, whatever the case may be. But, not completely on the other side of it. No one gets completely on the other side of a brain injury or something like that. But as you begin to, you're wondering like, well, who am I to share what I've been through? But then when you hear someone say they've been encouraged by your story, it emboldens you to share what's going on.
Exactly. And so I want to let you start, let the listeners know, your story, what you've been through.
It's a combination of life circumstances and some physical concerns. But in 2012, right before we moved up here, I lost both my parents within a 4-month period. And so my father was in April or so, and that was related to some heart conditions and not necessarily unexpected. But still, I had a great relationship with my dad, and losing your dad, it was hard. And then as we were considering moving up here, my mom died in a car crash. In fact, she died 3 or 4 days after we told her they were moving up here. And that was quite sudden. And so, as you can imagine, that was just awful. But we were moving up here. There was some sense we're like, okay, we're a little bit more freed up because we were worried about leaving my mom behind as a widow. And as we were coming up here, something was going on mentally, and I couldn't put my finger on it. I was having what was called pauses, or to everyone else, it looked like I was just deep in thought or kind of distracted, and I didn't know what it was, and went to see a doctor. We did the right thing, and understandably, when you tell the doctor, hey, I lost both my parents, so in the midst of a move, and we're trying to sell our house, I don't blame him, but he said, well, you're under a lot of stress. I'm like, you're right. I am. You're right. And so you can't necessarily remove those stressful circumstances, but you try to put things in place. And then we wound up moving up here in January 2013, and we're so excited to be in Fredericksburg. We loved it. But unfortunately, things did not get better for me. I was becoming more distracted, and moments, 30, 45-second moments maybe, where I just really wasn't present or saying things I didn't remember saying. And sadly, my family would point them out, and I admit I was a little defensive.
Of course.
I was like, there's nothing wrong with me, because I didn't know what it was. Yeah. And at that point in time, I planted Evan and Grace Fellowship, and I was preaching, and so this was sort of about a third of the way into, maybe halfway into 2013, and I had one of those moments in the midst of the sermon. Now, a funny moment. Everyone thought I was just caught up in the spirit. They thought I was Gordon's really into it, right? And then, but there was a wonderful ER doctor in the crowd, and he pulled me aside, and he said, "You just had a seizure," and I was like, what are you talking about? And he goes, I've seen it. Layman's term is a silent seizure. And he gave me the name of a doctor. And he goes, I want you to go see him immediately. And I appreciate that. That means a ton when the doctor took the extra step and recommended someone that meant a lot to him. So I went and see him, and you go through all the battery of tests, and the tests are awful. Let's put you in a cave and flash, lights. We're going to try to get you to reproduce a seizure, and it's necessary. But I mean, that whole process is incredibly awful. And so he could look at it and say, you've got a brain injury, your left frontal lobe, there's damage there. And you're having what's called partial complex seizures. Partial meaning you're partially aware, partially unaware. So they're not grand mal. I don't fall out. I might be disoriented, but I'm there and I'm not there. And I describe it to people as, like the scene in a horror movie where the hallway gets elongated. But I'm there, but I can't. Yeah. I'm aware that things are going on out there, but I can't participate. And so my doctor put me on a regimen of medicine, and that was as hard as the seizures, because they give you a medicine and then you call them and go, hey, I had a seizure. So then they increase the medicine. And then you get to the point where they can't increase it anymore. And then they go, well, that medicine doesn't work for you. So they begin to decrease that medicine and onboard you with another one. And I understand that. They can't just cut you out. Right. That was the most difficult time in the medicine process, because you've got two seizure brain medicines fighting for your brain. And I remember sitting with a group at church, and there's a conversation going on, and I'm having the conscious thought, I am losing my mind, because I could not participate.
It's so scary.
Yeah, people are asking me things, and I'm barely able to respond. And I'm trying to be the moderator of this meeting, and I really couldn't respond. And unfortunately, I was getting very angry, and I'm not. That hasn't been a part of my story, but I'm getting very angry, and my family is facing the brunt of it, and just normal functions. I was having to come home every day and sleep for 2 or 3 hours just to try to get through the day, and still having seizures when I'm driving or when I'm running, and very scary moments like that. Thankfully, the seizures came under control, and Angela, I think we've shared this before. The meds don't stop them; they just really kind of provide a ceiling.
Right.
So they're still going on in your brain, and but the effects are less. And so the doctor asked me, like, why do you think this is? Have you suffered brain injury? And as a child, I was knocked unconscious 3 times. I broke my nose 7 times. I just had more energy.
7 times?
Had more energy than that little body could contain. I'm like this little 85-pound kid running around, running into walls and everything. And so just my parents joked I just led with my nose everywhere I went. And so apparently the trauma of losing both my parents triggered that brain injury. He just said, you've had this brain injury your whole life, and the brain's so mysterious. You went through this intense trauma, and it just triggered it. And so thankfully, after a couple of years, they came under control. And if you don't mind, I'll share one more thing. When they got in control, this doctor was amazing. He said, okay, now let's take it further. And he gave me some amazing information about my diet. Now, I'm running marathons prior to all this. I think I'm a healthy person, right? I'm like, Doc, I ran 3 marathons before this. And he's like, if you change your diet, it'll change everything about this for you. And so he put me on a path towards a low sugar diet, obviously increasing my water intake, increasing my sleep. And at that point in time, I feel like I made just an exponential leap towards health. So I still have side effects for all those things now, but the care of that doctor, to be that patient, to walk me medicine to medicine, okay, now let's address your health in terms of diet. I mean, he's a wonderful neurologist, but he's not a nutritionist. But I I just can't express my thankfulness anymore to him. I mean, he's moved away, and I hated that, but that process was really, really difficult for me and my family, and professionally, it was a really difficult time. So it's part of my thinking every single day. Like, is this thing I'm doing helping my brain or hurting my brain? And so some days you make that choice. You're like, this is not the best thing for my brain today. And maybe it takes a day or 2 to kind of recover from it. So that's the shortened version of that story.
And how are you now? I mean, do you still have good days and bad days?
I thank you. I know if I go a couple of days without good sleep, I'm going to have brain fog. I know that. And again, like I mentioned, if I choose not to eat well, those things are going to affect me. But the biggest thing I think day to day is sleep. I mean, if I used to wake up and crash into my end table the moment that first step. That's not quite as bad, but there are days I know, like I'll just live with a headache all day. And I know I have to think, what have I done the last couple of days? So, I mean, running and all those things are incredibly important. And the doctor attributes endurance sports to helping like keep my metabolism up, because the meds goal is to lower my metabolism. Right. That's what they want. Like, let's lower brain activity so you don't have a seizure. But if I give in to that, I'll just be a nerd. I'll just sit on the couch all day. And so...
You're so active.
And fortunately, I love it. I mean, fortunately, I love running and hiking and getting on the bike. But there's part of me that's like, I can never give this up. Yeah. Because I feel like when I do, I feel like the meds are going to win. I think the biggest thing I fight, though, to answer your question, is just days that are cloudy. There are days where like the brain's just not working the way I want it to work. I mean, my company, I need to be creative. I need to be, there's a lot of output. And there's times where I wish you could just take 3 days and just not care about what you eat or what you drink or desserts and those kind of things. But sugars are just the enemy of my brain. And so I just have to be really careful with it. But I think that's the biggest thing. I mean, sleep and diet, if I don't take care of it, my brain hurts. I mean, literally, I just feel like my whole head hurts on days like that.
Yeah, and it's normal that you got angry. You couldn't control it. I was so angry when I was sick. And so it's normal to feel that.
But I felt so much guilt.
Yeah.
I mean,
because they were angry at the people you love.
Right.
And they're taking the brunt of it.
I mean, at that point in time, I didn't want my little 7-year-old to cry because I'm angry and I've gone to her so many times. I'm like, I'm so sorry. Please forgive me. And of course, she completely forgives me. But as a parent, you're like, what trauma have I inflicted on my child? When they're 20, does this still play a part? But fortunately, we've done our best to make sure we've walked through counseling on those things. But yeah, the anger, like, I get it. I probably was always, since I was a short little tiny kid who, kept breaking his nose and had to wear a splint to school. I was probably angry, very angry, but the anger is hard. And you mentioned you walked through that as well.
I did, yeah.
Yeah. So it's hard. The anger was, to me, dealing with the anger was more difficult than dealing with any sort of stigma of the injury, because I didn't want to be that person.
Do you think that you had seizures when you were a kid and that's why you got hurt so much? Or do they think it's all from
That's a great
brain
question.
injury?
Yeah. The best I could be explained to me is they felt like, I do have a brother who had grandma. And so maybe there is something. Just the two of us are only ones who've had any seizures along those lines. My sister has another brain condition, Arnold-Chiari. It's a brain pressure condition where the brain is actually too much pressure on the cranial pressure. So there must be something genetically going on. But all the damage, all the hits didn't help at all.
Didn't help it at all. No.
This past weekend I'm loading up the van for us to come home, and I'm constantly, I don't want to bump my head in any way. And our van's got this button and the back closes automatically, and I'm doing everything I can, and literally it hits me in the head.
Of course.
And it's a combination of like,
you're like, seriously?
I know. And I go in and everyone's like, are you okay? I was like, well, I hit the other side. It didn't hit the brain injury portion of it. But I can't look past all the brain injuries. That's probably what caused this specific type of seizure. But when you've got 3 family members with significant brain conditions, then there's something going on genetic.
Yeah. And what about your daughters? Do they have any type of brain injury? So
thank God there's no evidence whatsoever of any of that right now. They're smart and beautiful and creative. So no, we haven't seen any evidence of that, and just I just pray that never happens. Right now there's just no evidence of anything like that. So, but between me and my wife's a cancer survivor, Amy, we're constantly like, sadly, if they have a headache, we're like, you need to drink water. Sometimes we have to do a better job of comforting because we immediately want to go into diagnosis and like, we'll do this or do this. So, they know the elements of healthy eating and exercise and sleep and water. We do our best to try to keep that in front of them, keep things like sodas out of the house. There's probably some very strict rules around that make us less fun, but probably more careful.
But at least they have that. Some kids go years until, they're way into their adulthood, and then they're like, oh, okay, I need to get it under control. Like, at least you're guiding them.
Trying to. I'm sure I didn't have a glass of water until I was 25. I lived off of
coffee
and sodas. I mean,
yeah.
Just a college kid, and then just kind of getting out, and then all of a sudden you're like, I can't keep doing this. I mean, after a while, your adrenal glands are just passed out. So, but yeah,
it doesn't help the seizures at all.
It doesn't. It didn't. And so, but the doctor asked me, did I feel like I had seizures prior to the trauma with my parents? And honestly, I just don't know. I mean, the brain adapts. You may very well have. I may very well have had them, and just kind of lived with them, and until there were other people to recognize what was going on. I just don't know. My guess is I probably had them throughout my life and just had no way to actually attribute them until they were more prevalent.
And then what did you think when the doctor was told you? Did you believe him, or were you like, yeah, no?
Well, it's funny. That's a good question. I mean, when you go through the MRIs and the EEGs and everything, and when they do the one where they try to reproduce the seizure, I told the doctor, I was like, that was useless. I didn't have one. I was kind of mad.
It's like taking a car in.
I have a headache, right? And he goes, no, you had 5. I'm like, what are you talking about? So then he gets out the paperwork, and he could see, obviously, the spike. And so that lets me know they're happening even when I'm not aware of them. Yeah. Because he could show there was a seizure here, there was a seizure here. And so that's the thing. They're constantly happening. Maybe not constant, but I mean they're continual, whether I notice them or not. And that's when there's just days where I'm like, I'm done. The brain is over. I don't have anything left today. Yeah.
Do you have any PTSD perhaps from driving in a car and having a seizure? I know for me, when I was sick, I used to pass out behind the wheel of a car, and so I don't like to drive 95 because I passed out on 95. All the other highways are fine, but it was terrifying, and it happened more than once. And so for me, 95 is my trigger, and so I still can't drive more than 2 exits on 95 without.
I'm sorry.
Freaking
I'm sorry.
out.
It's a great. No one's ever asked me that question. I don't worry.
Now you're gonna think about it when you're driving. You're like, oh, I don't
worry when I drive, and I don't worry about it when I run. When I see moments of when I see moments where the brain's not working, or the normal, Gordon, I told you that. And I'm like, no, you didn't. There's moments in that where I fear, is it getting worse? Right. My doctors don't think this is going to result in something like Alzheimer's or something like that. But honestly, the medicine I'm on, the year I took it was the year it came out. It wasn't even covered for my insurance first couple of years, which, of course, means your medicine's $1,200 a month.
Yeah.
And so
ridiculous.
It took years for it actually to be covered. And I'm not that guy, but I wonder, okay, well, here's a medicine that there's no history of what does it look like to be on this medicine for 10 to 20 years. Right. So I do worry about that. There's times I wonder, am I not sharp as I once was? Or you get into this typical disagreement, I didn't say that. Yes, you did. I'm like,
did I?
I know. And so those are concerns. I don't, I don't want to be, a healthy 65-year-old who all of a sudden the brain's not working. I don't want there to be a precipitous drop. And so constantly pushing myself physically, and, if I have a couple of days where I just got back from the beach, so that means that this week I need to be really, really smart. I mean, you just enjoy yourself, and you don't want to be worrisome about those things. I still make my smoothies, which is annoying. I got to eat my smoothie every morning. I can't give that up. But those are some of the, that's probably, when something happens, there are moments that trigger in me an oh no. I don't fear necessarily that I'm going backwards, but I fear maybe the condition itself is going to manifest in some way that I'm just not aware of. Those things concern me.
Yeah. And then does that make you angry? I mean,
it's funny. Where does anger come from?
because you want to be all healed, at least for me, it's if I have a couple down days, it's why can't I just, go on with my life like a normal person? But then what is normal? Everybody has something.
I grew up a heavy metal kid, and so I still listen to all that, and Amy's like, why do you listen to that? It helps me vent. It helps me vent, probably, but it's one little way that's silly, probably. I've shared with you, and my goal has been to run the Boston Marathon for years, and thankfully I've qualified, but I've never been able to run. But one of the things that does make me angry is I know I'm running with a med that this goal is to decrease my metabolism. And so, and I can't blame that. You know, I don't blame that. I mean, you go out and train, you do the best you can, but I'm like, what would happen if I had 6 months or 4 months to train and I'm not on a medicine that's trying to slow me down? And so those are silly things that make me angry. And I'm so thankful for the med. So that makes me angry. I'd love to know what would life be like without it. And so I sat down with my doctor. I was like, doctor, because we did decrease the dosage at one point in time. I was very thankful. Where I'm on, they decreased the dosage by a third a couple of years ago because he felt like I was doing well.
Did you feel better?
Yeah,
Did you feel more energy?
Clarity and everything. I was like, wow. And I told him, I was like, doc, listen, what do I have to do to get down another third? And he said, it'll never happen. I was like, why? He goes,
You're
because...
like, come on, do you know who I am?
Right, but there's I don't know the term, but there's like an efficacy dosage. Like, this doesn't work unless you take at least this much. And that falls in that barrier.
A lot of medicines are like that.
Yeah, and I just never thought about it. He goes, you're in that range. He goes, if you decrease it, it's just not going to work anymore.
Yeah.
And he told me, he goes, you're going to be on this medicine for the rest of your life. And so I began thinking, I was like, okay, wait a minute. I had this condition and trauma triggered it. I become like super peaceful. Does that And he's like,
and then what happens if you have another big trauma?
Right. And so, and that's a great question. And thankfully we've walked through a couple of those. I mean, Amy's cancer and my mentor passed, and my father-in-law passed. We had some things like that. And thankfully I navigated it fairly well. But, I did not want to hear the doctor say, you're going to be on this med until the day you die. Yeah. And that made me angry. I'm like, but again, it's one of those things I rationally tell myself, be thankful. I mean, here's the list of things to be thankful for, but that's not what I wanted to hear. I wanted to hear there's a goal and I can train for it. And there's light at the end of the tunnel and those kind of things. And so,
Does it help prevent anything? Like, you mentioned Alzheimer's. Does the medicine help prevent any further brain
It's a great
actions?
question. I mean, the only thing they've told me is...
Do they even know? I mean, if it's a new medication?
As a layman, I'd go, well, how do you know? I mean, but he's told me you don't need to fear those conditions because of the med. Okay. So all I can do is go, well, you know more than I do. I mean, but at the moment, I'm not aware of any side preventions or anything like that. It's an oxy, so you've got to be careful with it, right? I mean, it's an oxy-based med, but... we'll see what happens with that.
And what about Parkinson's? Do the seizures lead to Parkinson's? I've heard that.
They do in some conditions, but it really comes down to it is subjective in that if you've got seizures and you wind up having Parkinson's, they'll say, okay, there's a correlation between there, but they can't say everybody who's had seizures leads to that. I mean, I look at myself and I think I'm incredibly fortunate.
You are. We all are.
I was speaking with a brain injury counseling service just recently, and which is wonderful. I mean, I was able to speak to
talk about advocating.
Well, I haven't jumped in yet, but we're talking about that. Like, how can I get involved? So I don't want to. I haven't done it yet.
You're not going to put it out on the podcast today.
No. But I got to speak to both a 70-year-old who was in a coma for 2 months, and a 10-year-old who was having 60 seizures a day. And they were so inspiring to me. I mean, because the 10-year-old's playing field hockey and she's made so much progress. And then and I just got to remind myself, I'm so fortunate. In fact, some of the counselors were telling me the challenge for me is, Gordon, not everybody's going to have as much progress as you've had. Like, you've got to come from a perspective that your story is not everybody else's story. So I appreciate that. And so, I mean, obviously, if I do that, I'm going to have to get a ton of training that I make sure that I'm not looking at everybody and thinking my story is their story. And that's part of it. I mean, you know that when you shared me your story, it's completely different than mine. I mean, what you have in common is a lot, but everybody's journey is very, very unique.
It is. And it amazes me how trauma can bring something like that out. I mean, for me, my father died. My grandfather died. I got married. And, I had a gorgeous honeymoon and, the stress of the wedding and everything, and moved to a new home. And that's a lot. I was flying all over the U.S. for work, and I was getting all these accolades for work. And then, I was training for a marathon. And woke up the next morning, after I made my best time the night before, I woke up paralyzed. It's like, you don't think about that. You don't think that all that stress could bring out something that you've been living with for forever.
Well, and first of all, I gotta say, you've shared me your story before, but I'm so sorry. I mean, just waking up that day had to be terrifying and angry. And
it was.
But there is a movement presently where people are talking about emotional health much more. And I'm thankful for that. No one talked to me about emotional health
Me
at
either.
any point in time about until the last probably 5, 6, 7 years.
Or I know I went to therapy or attempted to go to therapy,
Right.
but I never accepted it. I never wanted to go. My parents divorced, and so my mom's like, "Oh, let's go to therapy." And I was like, "I'm not telling my story to some stranger."
Who's this person? But learning emotionally healthy disciplines is something I'm very excited about. That is recent. I mean, it's probably got as much to do with the podcast culture as anything else. Is that people now have a platform, but learning disciplines about everything from prayer or meditation to journaling, to teaching you to speak to your brain instead of listening to your brain. I mean, all those are incredibly healthy, just emotional disciplines and brain disciplines that truly affect your day-to-day.
Yeah.
I mean, if I'm not prepared and what to tell myself when I have one of those days, then the brain works on autopilot. The brain's always going to do what's easiest.
It is.
So you've got to train it to make that thing you want it to be the easiest thing. And that's incredibly important. I don't mean to get too geeky. There's something called the reticular activation system. It's the thing that in your brain so that when someone asks you your name, you don't think about it. It's the process that makes your brain work easily.
Yeah.
And so, we have to train it. It's just like anything from learning the language all the way to your name. And so teaching myself to respond in certain ways is, if I don't train it, the brain's just going to work on autopilot.
I know. And I always have to tell myself things, when I'm driving on 95, it's like, okay, you're not going to pass out. You're not that same person,
Right.
but you have to train yourself. Otherwise, it's going to happen because your brain's going to do what you don't want it to do.
Yeah, self-talk
Yeah.
is incredibly important. And all the way from running, I talk to myself constantly when I'm running in the third person, like, come on, Gordon. Those
Come on,
kind
faster,
of,
come on.
Yeah, like it's just pain, or whatever the case may be. But teaching that to my kids and we're not a slave to our brain.
No.
We're not. And that's hard, especially when you're dealing with emotions. And it's not like I've reached that point or anything. It's not like I've got it all figured out. But in those days where I'm not having a good day mentally or my brain hurts so I'm not as clear, telling myself not to panic or what can I do or what I'm thankful for. Gratitude exercises are incredibly important for the brain. It's those little things that really make a big difference.
Yeah, and how do your daughters do? Like, do they help you? Do they remember, like, back then when you were having such struggles? Do they ever comment on it?
They do. They're 19, 17, 15, so they do. If I bring up something, they'll tell me not to worry about that. They're very kind. They're very gracious towards me. Unfortunately, if they see me distracted, they do respond. Like, are you okay? It's very kind of them, but I hate when that happens because, they saw it from the perspective I didn't. They were very scared to see their very high-functioning dad, being laid out on the couch, not being able to do anything. So, one of my daughters will go, "Are you okay?" And she'll ask it in such a way that I know what she means.
Yeah. And to walk in their shoes, to see that, like to be a fly on the wall, to know how they felt.
Yeah, they experienced both loss of grandparents, and then my seizures, and then 2 years later, Amy's cancer. They've walked through a lot of that as well, and that's why counseling is incredibly important for those things. But we try to teach them the mental exercises, and I'm confident at 17 or 15 I wouldn't have grasped them that well at all. But they hear them, they know what we talk about. They know those things, and we're prayerfully hoping that they'll become disciplines for them when they get older.
What do you tell people that have experienced the similar experiences as you? Do you tell them anything inspiring to let them know that they're not alone?
Yeah, I don't use the word epileptic. And it's just me. But if I go, I am an epileptic, it's such an identifier. I'm owning that.
Yeah.
And so,
that's how titles are.
They are. And so I've used epilepsy fighter. On my fitness page, I'll go epilepsy butt kicker. Whatever the case may be, I like to word it in such a way that it's not who I am. And you can understand that when you're walking through it, it's very easy to make that who you are. And identities are incredibly hard to shake.
And that's who I was for 8 years. I was a Lyme disease fighter. I was in treatment, and one thing too is that like for Lyme, it's a very hidden illness.
Right.
And so epilepsy is too, because you don't walk around having a seizure. I mean, sometimes you do, but you don't walk around every 5 seconds, so to say, I don't feel good or I'm sick, sometimes people don't believe you because they can't see it.
Yeah, and that's a broader awareness I think deserves that conversation. I mean, Lyme disease, epilepsy, autoimmune disease. I mean, so many people struggling with autoimmune disease. You can't see it. You can name it and people don't even know what it is. And then, there's just some silent conditions that are racking people's brains and bodies. And sometimes people don't have compassion for them. I mean, but I try to encourage folks. Again, I tell everybody, your story is your story and mine is mine. I've got a lot to be thankful for. If you ever want, I try not to just blank give advice, but like if there's any way I can encourage you and share with you. And I think for me, I don't think I've done enough of that. And that's part of the reason of interacting with this one group. It's like, what can I do? What does it look like for me to move in that stage where maybe I can be an encouragement or an ear anyway. So we'll see if that comes to fruition. I hope it does.
Yeah, definitely. And then, today, if you're feeling good now and then tomorrow, say you don't feel good, how does that change your brain? Like, I mean, just how do you cope with that?
It's a great question. So on days I'm feeling good, there's a pressure to like, I've got to maximize everything about this day. Like
you got to do everything.
Right. I don't want to waste. And then again, if I don't, then I'm like, oh, I should have gotten that done. And I know I get a lot done. I have no problem with that. I do my best to be as productive as possible. And on days like that, Amy does a great job telling me, like, you've done enough. It's okay to come home and crash and veg or disconnect.
It's hard though, because if you're feeling really great, you want to do all the things.
Right.
And then the next day you're going to pay for it.
Right. And so starting a business and then also, all those things are, like, what am I doing if I'm not taking advantage of it? And so reminding myself, again, I don't need to feel guilty to take that. Most everybody in my life is understanding if I explain what's going on. But it's really hard for me to tell people, like, I need this today. Yeah. Which as a result makes them feel like it's not there. And so I know that that's of my own doing. But on days where my brain's not there, I do as much and as best as I can. I keep the commitments I can. And then I've got to take time. I really do. I've got to make sure that I don't build a bunch of those days together. It's probably a fear of that.
Are there times of the year that are harder for you?
It's a great question. I thankfully, I don't really necessarily wrestle with seasonal depression. If I don't get to run this winter, that's going to be interesting to see.
I'll bring it back in the winter. We'll talk about it again.
So I'm thankful as I typically don't deal with that. So I'm going to say no, but if I'm presently working through a stress fracture, and so how much running I'm going to be doing going forward is in question. Next year could be really, really interesting for me because that's my typical, offload a lot of stress and that kind of thing. Yeah. There's tons of things I can do to replace it, but if it's in the middle of winter, I'm not biking.
No.
So.
Do you run in the snow or when it's icy out?
I do everything I can to keep it safe, but low 20s is when it just gets too much for me. But I go out there with double gloves and the heat warmers and the ear. I mean, it's silly, but it keeps. I mean, I love being outside, and so.
It's refreshing too.
It is. So we'll see what the next few months look like. I mean, I feel good about recovering from this and maybe mixing in a few things so I'm not dealing with as much for the stress fracture. So I don't think there's a worse season for it, but the worst season is just when I pile on too much. That's the worst season, when I just really pile on too much to try to accomplish.
Yeah. And at UMFS, we call everyone Unwavering Champions. We call our families. We call our staff, our kids, Unwavering Champions. How are you an unwavering champion in the community? Because you are. I mean, we wear so many hats. You've been through so much.
I appreciate that. Wow. Well, I mean, up until last year, I've been a pastor in a church and I've tried to care for people spiritually as best as possible. And so the last 6-7 months have been a transition from that, where I'm not doing day-to-day counseling and those kind of things. And so our company tries to give 10% of our top line revenue to charities in the area. And so we're trying to be a giving organization. I'm exploring this opportunity with brain injury services as well. There's a nonprofit that I'm speaking with right now about coming on their board, and we'll see if that happens. I don't want to do that. And if it happens, I'm really, really excited about partnering with them. They do amazing work in the community. But the biggest thing is I spend so much of my day out and about. I'm not a cubicle kind of person. And the result of that is I get to speak to a lot of people.
Yeah.
I really do. And so there's part of me that just sees what we do as a mission where, I mean, I love giving encouragement or counsel, or if someone says, have you got a couple minutes? And I'm usually like, if I'm working out, I've got a couple of minutes. If I'm out in the public. And so I really just try to give as much encouragement and advice as possible. But in terms of where the mission energy is going to go, one is hopefully this brain opportunity, and two, we'll see about that that charity, that nonprofit. I really, really hope that comes together.
It's nice. So, I mean, when I got into remission, I started doing a lot of advocacy work, and people still on Instagram, they follow me and they're like, how did you beat it? Because most people don't go into remission in Lyme disease. They're like, how did you beat it? And I, like you, I did a lot of nutrition, you know, and that really helped me. But I feel like my past brought me to where I am today. Right. How do you think your past reflects on who you are as a person now?
Well, I mean, a lot of my personality is driven on two things. I mean, I was the youngest of five, and that's so I think goals, ambitions, and drive came from that. I was really incredibly blessed with my parents. I mean, I just had their undying approval and affection. I know that's incredibly rare. I mean, don't get me wrong, like every other kid and adult, I had conflicts, but I could call my parents up and they would just be excited about almost anything I did. And so I just never felt like I couldn't do whatever I put my mind to. And so don't get me wrong, I got a list of failures as big as anyone else's person's, or missed goals or whatever. I know that past plays a part of this. So as soon as a large challenge like that comes together, I just kind of systematically put it together. That's why training and running fit for me. I know what I do on a Monday and a Wednesday and a Friday. I just look on the schedule and how many miles and how fast am I supposed to run. A lot of that plays a part in it. I'm immensely thankful that I was already a marathon runner when this hit. Yeah. If I'd had to start from ground zero, that would have been really, really difficult. So when I was at my worst and I literally couldn't run 1 mile, I was so scared to death. But it was constantly, well, what do I have to do next to do that? And don't get me wrong, I had so many discouragements and days where it's just in tears or didn't feel like I could get it. But I know a lot of that past played a part in how I fight this today. I don't fear that I'm going to lose the motivation for it, but I do think I need to keep this up for the next 30 years, whatever that may be. So those are my mind. Like, I think I can still do this for another 30 years, like just the training. So, I am planning on it. Yeah, if not, I'm just kind of concerned, but we'll see.
Yeah, I feel like everything happens for a reason. I feel like for me, if I didn't go through what I went through, I wouldn't be as strong as I am today. I wouldn't appreciate life as much as I do. You go through experiences and, I never thought I'd wake up paralyzed. I never once. I was an avid dancer, a runner. I never thought, I'd not have ability to walk. You don't think that. And then all of a sudden it's taken from you, and so now everybody asks me, why are you so cupcakes and rainbows? Why do you smile all the time? It's like, because I've been on the opposite spectrum. I've been through the hardest part of what I think is going to be the hardest part of my life. And so you can only go up.
So let me ask you a question. So it sounded like you were doing all the right things before you woke up paralyzed, right? I mean, it sounded like you were healthy.
It's just all this stress.
Right. And so when that was going through, was that embittering? Like, I did all the right things.
So angry. I was so angry. Yeah. My poor husband, he got the brunt of it. I mean, I, took swings at him. I, just wanted to curl up in a ball. I didn't want anyone to help me. I was so independent. And then my new husband is now pushing me in a wheelchair, like bathing me in the shower. That's takes so much dignity away.
Gosh, I'm sorry.
I was angry. And then after a while, it's like, all right, well, I'm gotta accept it now. So let's move on and stop being angry. Let's fight this.
When I look at my anger, and again, I haven't reached nirvana when it comes to anger, but when I look at that anger, I only give the meds 50% blame for that. I mean, I know that there was anger and frustration in me. You know what I'm saying? I don't want to just pass that time off like, well, I was on some meds. And so, I mean, I look at it and I'm like, what did I have to figure out about my own heart that it revealed that there was a lot of anger there that maybe I hadn't wrestled with. But I don't want to give myself that too easy a pass on that. Like, I'm not trying to punish myself, but I needed to do some work trying to figure out why that anger was there. And some of those things have been clear, and then some of those things haven't been.
Did you lose, like for me, I lost a ton of friends and a ton of family. Did you lose people when you were sick?
I don't think so, and I can open up to this. I mean, so when that was happening, we were here to start the church, Evident Grace Fellowship. And so
you had that support.
Yeah, the first 12 to 18 months of starting the church, we've started to, is just some of the sweetest thing in the world. Like, you really don't hit a lot of the obstacles and conflicts that happen naturally when you have a church. But the church did a great job of loving and caring for me early on. And I'm very, very thankful. And the folks that were there that first year or so, I'm immensely thankful for. Now, it did bump into circumstances later on. Not every, I mean, I can specifically think of one person that just was not understanding when I was like, I can't help you. I'm on a couch. I can't do anything. Not everyone understood that, but for the most part, that community was really, really sweet. Both of my name's families, none of them are here in Virginia, and so they were great about checking in on me and asking questions, and even now we'll still, even if they haven't asked in a while, I'll get a random text like, hey, how's this going? So I really appreciate that. Yeah. But for the most part, during that initial time frame, no. Of course, later on, there were folks who didn't understand, and when I was just saying, I can't help you today. I can't help you.
Yeah, you find out who your true friends are, the real people in your circle.
Yeah, I'm really blessed. Amy and I are really blessed with just a couple friends that have just been with us for 20 plus years, and they were very caring.
That's so nice. Yeah, that's great. Well, Gordon, it has been a treat to have you here today. I really appreciate it. If people want to reach out to you and find you, where can they locate you?
Well, I'm on every social media. So if you just look for me on Facebook or Instagram, primarily, you'll find me at both those places. If you want to follow my health journey, I have pages there called Toughness Groove, and so, but you can just find me on Facebook and Instagram. The company is online on all those places as well. But anything there, folks reach out. I'll do my best to respond as quickly as possible and be an encouragement. I appreciate you sharing the story, asking me to share my story. I'll just say this last thing. There's still always a sense of me that says like, well, who are you to share the story? And I just have to fight that, because I know that there's people who are struggling with lots of things, and we just need stories of anyone who's made any amount of progress. So
that's what helped me. Yeah. I mean, when I finally got over the hump of being angry and realized, all right, it's time to fight, other people's stories inspired me to fight. And, if we don't share ours today, there's somebody out there that can relate to us.
Yeah. Well, good. I'm glad you have. I mean, it's how we wound up having this conversation. So
exactly.
Thank you.
I really appreciate you and all that you do for the community and our friendship and how we reached out to collaborate. So
thanks so much. I appreciate it.
It's been great to have you here.
Thanks.
Yeah. And of course, this is Fredericksburg Mission. My name is Angela Rivers. And if you would like to learn more about becoming a foster parent, please visit umfs.org/foster. Thank you and have a great day. Thank you for joining us. I'm Angela Rivers with Fredericksburg Mission. Tune in at Apple Podcast, Spotify, or anywhere you listen to your podcast. Join us again next week for our next episode.
How do you shorten the time it takes to buy a car? Car buying just got easier. Pohanka365.com lets you complete as much or as little of the car buying process online. Pohanka365.com. Car buying simplified. Anytime, anywhere.